Hey everyone, welcome to the Bottlecrow YouTube channel. My name is Derrick Freeland and I'm the founder and member of Bottlecrow Publications. And this is kind of going to be our maybe first official video. Last week we tried a thing where the group of us got together. We're comics and tabletop gaming creators cooperative. And so we tried last week to get together and make a sort of a intro informative video for all of you to watch and all of our followers and that kind of thing. And it went great. We had a grand old time talking to each other about our projects and what's going on, but we had some technical difficulties, and so it ended up that we captured the audio of the event, but did not capture any of the images, really, except for a few. It was mostly frozen still images. If you're interested, I'm going to post a link to that video. You can at least listen to the audio if you're curious. So this week, what we're going to do is post videos of what was going to be in that event, and hopefully give you the same kind of experience, same ideas, go over the same things, and talk about the same projects, basically. So today, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be working on a bit of art. I'm going to do a live art demo, and I'll be working on this piece here, which is a there we go, promotional piece of work it's one of the characters in my upcoming series called After. And I'm going to be working on that and kind of talking to you about what I've been up to, what I'm working on, and what you can expect to see kind of over the summer and by October. October we'll be at Lilac City Comic Con here in Spokane, Washington, where we're based, and be premiering a bunch of stuff, like a whole bunch of projects. So yeah, let's get to it and get to drawing. What I've got going here is this is Chiron, who's a character, as I was saying earlier, a character from my upcoming comic series After. And Chiron is essentially what happens in this series, in this setting, is that when you die, all of your lifetime experiences, all of your love, your hate, your anxiety, your wonder, your joy, all of those things, all your experiences kind of come together, and they create kind of a whole new being. And the being that they create, it's you, but it's kind of a new version of you that's been created again from all the sort of the life experiences. And what happens is that being, once you pass on, appears in Acheron, which is where Chiron here hangs out. And Acheron is sort of the realm that is in between sort of the mortal world, Earth, or our plane of existence, and the afterlife. And so what happens is you pass on, and then you show up on the shores of Acheron, and you meet Chiron, and Chiron is there to help you kind of cross the river over to, so you sort of appear on the near shores of Acheron, and then you cross over to the far shores of Acheron, and in the far shores of Acheron you are confronted kind of with whatever you brought with you. So you're a being that's been created by your life's experiences, but then there's this whole environment that you create, also sort of based on your life's experiences that you are confronted with when you hit the far shores of Acheron. And so Chiron is there not only to help you get across the river, but to help you sort of deal with and confront whatever it is that you brought with you, and sort of resolve those things before you move on to the next part, which is the actual afterlife itself. And the actual afterlife is this place they call the Centennial, and it's called the Centennial because you are, the second being that's been created has this, it's kind of like a second life. So what happens is that second lifetime lasts for 100 years, and you are kind of in your own little world for that 100 years, but that little world has kind of thin boundaries and bumps up against other people in their little worlds, and you can affect those other people with whatever it is that you brought with you. So so that's the Centennial. Basically you're in this second life and you're with other people, roughly speaking, and you can impact those other people. And because you can impact those other people, it's necessary that you sort of resolve whatever it is that you brought with you, and generally your baggage, right? So whatever stuff that you're bringing into this new realm is something that you have to kind of deal with, so that you don't affect other people with it who have made it onto the Centennial. And that's what Chiron is here for, to sort of help people deal with that stuff. So Chiron, once they meet, who the person that's crossing over, the main, goal is to, like I said, kind of deal with the baggage, right? And once you sort of come to terms with what's going on, how to describe it. So once you come to terms with what's going on, you present your case to, there's 3 judges who people meet after they meet Chiron here, and those 3 judges decide if you can go right away to the Centennial, or if you need more time, or if you should never go to the Centennial because it's just too much of a risk and a danger for the other people that are there. And so what happens is you make a case. Generally people, they don't generally understand fully how they died, and so part of the process is sort of unraveling the mystery of how and why they passed away, or what were the conditions of their passing. And coming to terms with that and what that means. Anyway, so they present that to the 3 judges. The 3 judges decide if you're going to go, if a person is going to go to one of 4 places. So there's, let's see if I can remember this. There is, I'm having trouble thinking of, well, I'll think of it here in a second. But anyway, the 4 places, they all have increasing sort of severity, or increasing, like each of them is increasingly more difficult to pass through onto the Centennial. So they're, if you have, led a relatively good life and you're relatively well sort of resolved in whatever it is you brought with you to the afterlife, then you go through the first door, which is just sort of, you can think of it as kind of a short walk up a path into the Centennial. And then it just sort of gets harder from there. So the next path is, a little more difficult. And then the path beyond that is, you could think of it as a mountain you may climb the rest of your life. And then the 4th path is really not a path, but more of a cage, right? Something that will you're more than likely, not necessarily always, but more than likely going to be trapped in for the rest of your life. Because you're alive for 100 years, right? So you'll be trapped there for 100 years until you pass away for good, basically. Not necessarily always. That'll be sort of one of the things we explore in the series is, what happens if you make it out of there. But yeah, generally that's how that works. So the judges, they've got to decide, really it's kind of, how much of a risk are you? Yeah, and so that's kind of the premise. It actually, my idea for it was that I wanted to do a procedural, which maybe sounds weird for sort of a metaphysical, philosophical kind of setting, but I thought that'd be really interesting. I love procedurals. I love Law and Order. I'm a huge Law and Order fan, and I always thought it would be interesting to see that sort of kind of storytelling applied to something that wasn't necessarily, sort of our legal system. And so that was really interesting to me, how these beings that make judgments about people, kind of for the rest of this second life, how they come to those decisions and sort of the complexities of those decisions. And then also like exploring, people and their lives and what does it mean to have had the experiences that they've had, and how do those experiences sort of play out, in sort of a philosophical, metaphysical kind of way. So yeah, the stories, the comics are actually going to be, I guess I'm calling them, they're anthology style stories. So each story is about an individual person, and then they have, the recurring characters. So there's Chiron here, and then there's 3 judges, and the 3 judges are Aker, Amenet, and Sa. It's kind of based off of a little bit, very loosely based off of Egyptian mythology, or I guess ancient Egyptian mythology, and sort of their views on, or their mythology sort of surrounding death and the afterlife and all that kind of stuff. And a little bit based on Greek mythology. Chiron that's a Greek sort of Greek character from Greek mythology. So yeah, that's kind of the premise. And originally, actually, this story, this setting, comes from a short film, actually, that I made it was 20 years ago. This year, I made a short film called Transit, and it was the story of this guy who passes away, and he meets Chiron, and they cross the river Acheron, and he's thinking that he's just going to pass. He's just going to pass right into the afterlife, but they encounter an obstacle, and it's a gate, so they have to stop and figure out why there's a gate there, and what happened in his life to put a gate, a literal, obstacle in front of his path into the afterlife. And yeah, it was always something that I wanted to do a little more with. I had thought of, like a TV series, or long ago when I was in my 20s, I was really into filmmaking, so that's why, I sort of used that medium to tell that story at that time. But now, I've come back to comics, been back into comics for a long time now. And so, I guess just kind of recently, it occurred to me, I was sort of thinking about what I wanted to do next. I just, I finished a couple of projects recently and wanted to figure out, what to do next. And I always liked that setting, and I was always really interested in, the ideas behind it. So I took those ideas, the basic ideas from that original film, and turned them, sort of fleshed everything out, and thought a little more about sort of the concepts and the implications, of those ideas, and came up with After. And so that's what we have now. First issue of After should be out. It's coming out this spring. I don't know which month necessarily. Probably maybe a little closer to the end of spring. So the very beginning of June, more than likely. And we're hoping. So for Bottlecrow comics, we've been able to kind of keep up with a bi-monthly schedule for comics release. So there's myself and 2 other people involved with Bottlecrow Publications who are making comics, and I'll post their information here on the video, so you can go check them out. But yeah, so far it's been working out pretty good. We've been able to put some stuff out every couple of months. There's a new. We've been we're all moving on to sort of ongoing storylines, but we have been putting out short stories, and those you can actually find. We have a Gumroad site and a Patreon, and I'll link to those as well. But if you're interested, you can go check those out. Oh, and then actually, speaking of those stories, so the fun thing about this story, the fun thing about After, is that it actually is going to be a little bit of a continuation of the comic I just put out. In a way, it's sort of adjacent to, not necessarily a straight continuation, but or maybe you could consider it that way. But so this is the sort of latest from me anyway. This is End Over End, and so in this story, this character here, it's funny. I haven't really I haven't gotten too into. This was just sort of meant as a short story, and sort of a kind of a kind of a conceptual piece. So I didn't really didn't name her or give very many names to any of the characters in this, but that's going to be actually fleshed out more in future issues of After. So anyway, so this character, she loses her partner, and her partner passes away, and it's sort of about what she goes through in a very much like a kind of a surreal, metaphorical sense. She's having all these sort of anxiety fantasies about what happened, and about letting go of this person and kind of moving on. It's basically the hardest decision she's ever had to make, and so she goes through this series of sort of thoughts about it, and the thoughts are all kind of illustrated in these sort of anxiety fantasies that she's having about what she's going to have to do, which is to let go and kind of move on. And so we find out by the end of this story. Let me get to that part here. And this has been kind of fun. Sort of tying these stories together. At first I just made this story, and then I was like, oh, I'm gonna start making After, and then it occurred to me like, oh, I could, this is about death also, and sort of, what we sort of think in our minds, and kind of these forces that create these sort of deep fears and joys and all that stuff. And so that would tie really well into After. I don't know if you can see it very well, but this guy here, this is Dante, and he's actually the main character of this first issue of After. So we're going to explore, this comic is kind of, in a way, it's about her and her grief, but in a small way at least, it's about his passing. So we're going to sort of explore what happens to him after he passes on, and sort of what his life was like, and why he died, and all that kind of stuff. But the cool thing is, eventually, After is going to sort of hop around to all types of people, and actually in all sort of different time periods, and sort of explore, a lot of different ideas surrounding death, and there's going to be a lot of firsts. I'll talk about that in a second here. But one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to come back to her and find out what happened to her when she passes on, and sort of what she brings with her into the afterworld, and how that sort of plays out. So that'll be a lot of fun. I'm really looking forward to that. It'll be a really interesting story to sort of explore. So that's kind of how some of our books will be connected. So, what I was saying just a second ago was that I'm going to be exploring kind of different themes and different kind of big ideas, I think, about death with this series. And so one of the storylines, for example, so the stories, they're not all necessarily about just humans. We have one story about a deer, a buck that passes away, and what happens to him. There's a story about there's an android that passes away, in a manner of speaking. There's a story about this community of Australopithecus people, and that one, so that goes, way back, however many, couple million years or whatever, before, humanity, right? So, that storyline is actually going to be about the very first murder that happened, like intentional, planned out murder that, and the idea here is that, these things happen, and the Chiron and the three judges, they sort of have existed, back to almost the beginning of time, or at least the beginning of sentient life, right? Sort of more life that has a certain level of cognitive, ability. So they've existed at least as long as that type of life has existed. And in those, many sort of eons, I guess you call them, they encounter these things. They encounter the first murder. They encounter the first, artificial intelligence passing on. And it's sort of about not just these people who pass on sort of learning about themselves, but also Chiron and the three judges sort of learning about these people and about how life sort of evolves and changes, and what it becomes, right? Not just like what, they don't know. The idea behind Chiron and the three judges is they're not like gods per se. They're these really sort of, they're pretty powerful beings in a way that they run Acheron, right, and make these really big decisions about what happens to people, but they're sort of just trying to figure it out, and they're sort of flawed, and they're not perfect judges. There's going to be stories that explore what happens when they make the wrong decision and they send somebody to the wrong place, right? There'll be stories that sort of explore what happens if somebody leaves Acheron and doesn't go back, doesn't go to the Centennial, but instead goes back maybe to Earth or wherever. So I really want to, I'm really excited to sort of explore, explore these different ideas, right? And, really dive into sort of the implications of this setting and the meaning behind, all this stuff, or what it could mean, right? Not necessarily what it means exactly, but what it could mean. So I'm drawing, this is Chiron hanging out in Acheron, and the fun thing about Acheron is that it's very surreal. So I love drawing nature, but it's really fun to draw, just kind of make these things up, just sort of think about, just think about natural shapes and forms, but without, using reference, just sort of using the tools and coming up with some interesting lines and textures. It's kind of a fun break from, usually when you illustrate, you've got you're trying for a very specific idea, or, illustrating like a setting or, whatever it is. And, you really have to use, you really use the reference for that and make it work. But this, can be whatever I want it to be, because it's not a real place, or at least it's not a place that, conforms to the laws of biology or anything like that. here. So lots of fun just kind of playing with, the shapes and all that. I mean, it's by the river, so it's, vaguely river-esque, riverside sort of vegetation, foliage, that kind of thing, but don't have to get too into the particulars. You can just kind of have fun with it. When I really get into the actual stories, I've already, this first issue is getting pretty close to being done. And I really have to dive into the research and figure out what everything looks like and work out a whole bunch of good reference material and photographs and that kind of thing. But the fun thing is with that is that I actually you can see it in my other comic end over end here. Most of my stories, at least for right now, they take place in Spokane here, where we're based. And so, like, this is an actual, parking garage and street in downtown Spokane. These are places. This is a park by the river, in Spokane here. So that's kind of the fun thing is I can walk out my front door and hike around town and figure out, kind of get to borrow from some really cool settings. So that's fun. At least for this first story, I'm doing that as well, because it's a character who lived in the same place as the main character and end over end there. So I got to run around and figure out, and that story actually was fun. It was sort of figuring out, his last days and where he would have gone and what happened and where that happened and all that kind of stuff. But I love all this stuff, these little details here. I'm doing the work for getting, the reference. It's a lot of fun because, if you really do it right, you can make, your setting can really be a character in the story, on top of it being, actually immersive and putting the reader into the place. You can also turn that place into a character in the story. So it's kind of cool that way. And I just think it's good storytelling. I think people live and exist and things happen in a space, right? In a place, and that place has, an impact in some ways, or on how how those things happen and why they happen and that kind of thing. So I think it's really important, especially in a visual medium like comics, working that stuff out and figuring out, what does all that mean? What is the place? What are its characteristics? How does it impact the characters in the story? But that's, to me at least, that's the fun part, is working that stuff out. For the ink to dry. And I think, the setting, especially for after here, is going to be pretty important, because what happens is, as I was saying earlier, the characters in the stories, they bring whatever it is from their lives into this place. And so the place, they have an impact on the place. And the place, has kind of an impact on them. So there's sort of so Acheron will kind of look, however, take the form of, their lives and experiences to a certain extent, but also retain some of its own sort of features. So there's sort of a blending of the two. And then Chiron and the three judges actually also sort of take on whatever form. So this is more of a human form, right? Because the person that passed on in this first storyline is human, right? And he passed on sort of in modern day. So you have, not necessarily modern clothes, but, pants and a shirt, things that are at least vaguely recognizable. But in other stories, like I said, there's a story about a buck who dies, and so Chiron and the judges actually take on the form in Acheron itself. Acheron is the sort of this great forest, and then Chiron and the judges are, they still have their sort of defining characteristics, but they are in the form of sort of woodland creatures, something closer to a deer than a human, right? Because it's a deer that passed away and is influencing, the world, influencing Acheron. So that's going to be a lot of fun to kind of play around with and sort of interpret, what is the form that these characters take, given, the person that they're kind of dealing with, or that they're, I guess, hosting in Acheron. And actually, it's also really exciting too because I'll get to kind of explore kind of these different genres as well, depending on the person. And I think that's going to be a lot of fun. I really enjoy doing, I don't know, I'm into all kinds of stuff. I mean, like, science fiction and fantasy are probably my main interests, but I really enjoy sort of exploring all kinds of different settings and ideas, and aesthetics and motifs and all that kind of stuff. And so this book is really, going to give me a chance to do that in a big way, because every issue is going to be really different in that way. It's going to be, there's a story about a woman who works in sort of the bullpen of a comic book publisher in the 70s, and so her afterlife experience, her experience in Akron, is all sort of it, that was hugely important to her. That was like her whole world. So the world of Akron takes the form of a 70s sort of superhero comic book, right? So it'll be stuff like that. Which is just to say I'm really kind of excited about exploring those things, and hopefully all of you watching and anybody else who picks up the book will be, have a good time sort of diving down that rabbit hole with. One thing I do want to talk about, because this is sort of our first, like I was saying, our first Bottlecrow video here on YouTube, is sort of about Bottlecrow and what it is. And as I was saying before, we're a cooperative of comics artists and tabletop game designers. And originally Bottlecrow was kind of just, so I have a lot of different interests. I'm my main focus right now is comics, but I also am really interested in tabletop gaming and sort of board games and role-play games. Any kind of game that actually has sort of a narrative mechanic to it. And, so I was working on all these things, and I needed something to put everything under, that wasn't just my name, but something that I could kind of brand and create, something recognizable, like the logo and all that stuff. So yeah, it was this long process of kind of looking up names and finding out that every cool name that I wanted has already been taken, of course. So what I actually ended up on was Bottlecrow because, one, it wasn't taken. Two, it was it's an old D&D character that I played for a number of years, and so so it seemed pretty great. Seemed like easy enough. I thought at least sounded pretty interesting. And yeah, it was something that turned out to be really easy to sort of brand. It's kind of obvious, visually speaking, is like the visual identity of Bottlecrow is pretty obvious, and it turned out to be pretty good, sort of recognizable kind of brand. But anyway, so I put that together, and that was a couple of years ago, and I've been working on some stuff kind of here and there, sort of. Mostly it's been testing the waters, sort of seeing, putting some stories together and seeing what works and what doesn't work, and seeing what was interesting to me, what I could sort of continue on with and all that stuff. And while I was doing that, I met Savannah Irvin Villa, and like I said, I'll post everybody's info here on the video, links in the description. So I met Savannah, and she's an illustrator, really great illustrator, and I love collaborating. So I was really interested to have another. I wrote a story, and I wanted to have another artist illustrate the story and sort of interpret it in their own way. And so that was a hugely fun experience. And so we created Ossuary, which is kind of this sci-fi horror comic. I don't know if I have... Well, yeah, I don't have a physical copy right at the moment. We're sold out of them. But that you can actually see that on Patreon or Gumroad. You can pick up copies there. Or we have a Facebook group, and there is a preview of that story. Anyway, so we worked on that, and that was a lot of fun. Actually, we did do recently. This is our latest Bottlecrow release. We worked on this story together called My Old Friend, and this is about a woman who gets into a deal with the devil, but then becomes friends with the devil, and kind of how that comes to pass and what it means, and the sort of the whole idea behind that. But anyway, this is the latest project that Savannah and I have worked on, and yeah, her work is great. It's really I don't know how to. She's just. I love the clean style. I love her attention to detail. Her ability to really give the characters in the story kind of a great performance. The emotion and kind of the blocking in each scene is really fantastic. And it's interesting, working with somebody, being an artist, and then working with another artist. It's so much fun to see how they interpret your ideas, right? What they take away from what you've written down, and then how they sort of turn that. Here's a little ad for After, but anyway. And actually here, this is. I don't know if you can see this very well, but that's Saw. That's one of the judges in Acheron. But anyway, I worked with Savannah on Ossuary, and then recently on My Old Friend here, and that's just been a huge amount of fun. And now we're actually started on a new comic that she's going to put up some videos here pretty soon that you'll get to hear kind of all about that project, and that one's sort of this big sword and sorcery epic, and it's going to be a lot of fun. Anyway, I worked with Savannah, and we've been able to sort of get work out every couple of months, and that's been going great. And so I thought it would be nice to kind of expand on that and get some more people involved. And so now we have one other artist, Nanette St. Cloud, who's working on this. It's going to be like a really cool, pretty weird space pirate kind of epic. Very excited about that. So she's working on that, and then I'm working with Tom Caraway and Jim Fury, and we're working on a Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition source book, like a world, like a new setting for D&D 5th edition. And so that's kind of at least for right now, that's the kind of the gaming side of things. But yeah, that's I guess mostly it. I just really love collaboration. I love, sharing ideas and having a group of people who are all sort of working to kind of on their own stuff, but in a way towards one sort of common goal. And yeah, because of that kind of love for collaboration, you know, like I said, I invited some more people to get involved with it, and they very graciously accepted. And so now we've got Bottlecrow Publications, which is this kind of cooperative. It's kind of a our setup is such that creators, we're all sort of a communal publishing house, and then creators hang on to, the rights to all their work. It's kind of I think it's how Image still works. Image Comics, at least in the 90s when it came out, that was their setup. Was they were all making their own stuff, but they would get together and kind of pool their resources to pay for like printing and editing and all the various stuff that you need to publish work. And that's kind of what we're going for. Is everybody's doing their own thing, but all of our efforts kind of feed into supporting each other and communally, paying for resources and that kind of stuff. So, yeah, that's Bottlecrow. And so, yeah, this year we're going to have, after Savannah is working on her project with me, Nanette is working on that project. So there'll be 3 ongoing series that are going to be launched, and then the D&D campaign setting, and then hopefully, this is just me wildly speculating, but one other thing that I developed a few years back was it's this kind of sci-fi role-play board game. I don't know how to never really figured out a good way to describe it, but there's this thing called Pater Asteri, and that is still something that we're working on here at Bottlecrow. That will potentially, I can't make any promises, but I'm hoping to sort of, what happened was we had this failed Kickstarter. It was not ready to go. The game was not ready, and I sort of launched a Kickstarter for it anyway, thinking that it would just sort of like work itself out by the time we did the Kickstarter, but it didn't. Of course, it was not a big failure necessarily, but definitely a failure. Definitely a miscalculation on my part as far as like how that stuff works. So I want to take a second stab at that and make it work. And so I'm hoping we've done a huge amount of work since then, development-wise and writing and all that kind of stuff. So now it's actually a lot of play testing, pretty close to ready at this point. So I'm really hoping by October I'll have something to show for that. Don't know what that'll be yet, if it'll just be getting ready for another Kickstarter maybe, or having an actual copies of the game available. I'm not sure yet, but that's something that's coming up, and that's going to be at least talked about, if not premiered, in October. And October again is Lilac City Comic Con is happening, which we're really stoked about because all the world ending is kind of slowing down, hopefully, and we can all sort of get back to semi-normal life by October. And so we get to have a comic convention, and that is really exciting because we haven't had one for a while, and that's kind of at least my favorite way to reach out to all of you and put stuff in front of you. I don't know, I'm kind of older. Well, older, I don't know. I'm in my 40s, so for me, we're trying to be online and all this, and it's been fun. It's good. I like it, but I'm much more of a analog, face-to-face kind of person. More comfortable doing that. It's more kind of my wheelhouse, I guess. So I'm very, very excited to kind of get back to it in October and be in a real place where I can meet people face to face and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that is very exciting. But yeah, that's Bottlecrow. Just a group of crazy artists who are working on games and comics for the most part. Someday we're hoping to sort of expand into a few other things. There's some kind of digital work that I'm really interested in doing. Also narrative. None of it's like what would be considered a wild departure from what we're doing now, but just in kind of a different format, in a digital format. So I'm excited about that, and then we've got more game projects, more sort of tabletop gaming coming up. So I don't know, bright future. think we'll call that good for now. Pretty happy with that. Yeah, stay tuned for some more Bottlecrow videos. We're gonna have some more art demos, a little more process, some from me, but also from the other artists involved, and kind of check in on their projects and see what's going on with all of that. And we're also gonna have a demo of the D&D setting that I was talking about earlier. So be on the lookout for that. Otherwise, yeah, have a great day, and thanks for tuning in.